Hello everybody, this is Gregory with How I Lost Over 100 Pounds and I've kept it off for 30 plus years, where there should be no hesitance in your weight loss and maintenance. Today we're going to talk about how your disordered eating and my disordered eating was all based on trauma. Now before we begin, if you need help with weight loss, contact me through the Clarity FM link found here in the episode notes. Also check out my website, naturopathicearth.com. There's a link in the episode notes, along with a link to my podcast, The Awakened Man, both of which have been around since 2017. I have tons of content. Check out my books, and if you appreciate my content, there is a link for PayPal. All right. I think in the second episode, maybe it was the third episode I did, way back in September of 2022, I talked about how you need to address the intergenerational trauma and the trauma in general that led you to have disordered eating. Now, everybody comes to obesity from different ways, different angles. As you guys know from my backstory, especially if you've listened to the Confessions of an Obese Child series, I was an obese child. And I talk about, I think it's in the first episode of Confessions 1, why I turned to food. I wasn't getting nourishment. I wasn't getting affection from my parents. My father was a Jekyll and Hyde alcoholic. So when he was Jekyll, he was great. When he was Hyde, he would tell me I'm a horrible human being. And then my mother was just too preoccupied with her depression to really be maternal at all. I mean, she was exceedingly aloof. Think of like Nicole Kidman in every movie pretty much. So at a young age, I turned to food. And that was the trauma that led me to turn to food and have a disordered relationship with food, because food was easier to access when you're 5 than alcohol or something else. So as I've mentioned before, if you put food in front of a 5-year-old, they're like, I'm hungry. You get them food, they'll eat until they're no longer hungry, then they leave it there. Like I'm amazed with my 5-year-old, like we'll go to a burger place, she'll eat burger and fries, like the kid-sized burger and fries, she'll eat half of it and walk away and go play. And I'm just like, why can't I be you 30, 40 years ago? And that's the disordered relationship. See, the children can just eat, okay, I'm no longer hungry, see ya, bye, I'm gone. So what causes them to have an ordered relationship with food and while others don't? And I would tell you it's trauma, childhood trauma, mostly. Now you could say, well, Gregory, I didn't gain my weight until I was an adult. And that happens. I think the majority of obese people probably didn't become obese until they were older. Their childhood obesity is pervasive, and we see this with intergenerational obesity. Like I remember used to going to Golden Corral or these buffet places and then just see these overweight parents and their kids were already overweight, and I would just get so angry. I would get so angry at them. But either way, no matter how you got to obesity, even if you didn't gain weight until you're older, well, why did you gain weight until you're older? Now, the low introspective answer to that would be, well, I just was working too hard and I just started eating junk food. But then it goes back to what I talked about with the child. Okay, people eat junk food all the time. And yeah, they have more calories and less nutrition, but they stop eating when they're no longer hungry. And if you're always stopping eating when you're no longer hungry instead of eating until you're full, it's very hard to get overweight. I'm hungry. It's like a Maslowian hierarchy of needs. I'm hungry. Here's the food. Oh, I'm no longer hungry. Walk away. Like the 5-year-old. But you didn't do that. If you were one of these who gained the weight when you got older, you kept eating. Why? Some would say maybe you went through a bad divorce or through a job, bad breakup, whatever it is, and you're numbing the pain. Certainly understandable and certainly reasonable. And that in itself is a trauma. See, it's trauma that leads us to have disordered relationships with food, with alcohol, with anything, porn, gambling. There's not a balance. There's no moderation. The pendulum is swung out and oscillated way too far to the other way. I would tell you that the majority of obese people are obese because of physical, I wouldn't say it's physical or sexual abuse as a child, because these are things that we can't talk about. The more obvious ones would be physical and sexual abuse. But I think the least obvious one is just going to be neglect. Neglect. And what's neglect? We think of neglect as Child Protective Services come to this house and there's a baby stewing in the same diaper for 6 days in the crib, not getting held, or those Romanian babies in the orphanages after the Cold War who weren't held their whole life. But certainly, I mean, that is an example of neglect. But there's more nuanced examples of neglect. Not getting love when you're a child. Your parents going through divorce. That's what they call ECT, early childhood trauma. It's a major thing. Maybe one of your parents is a drug addict or an alcoholic and you're having to witness that, or maybe one of your siblings is. Or somebody's got severe psychiatric problems in your household and this leads to stress. So there's a lot of definitions of neglect. But either way, there's something that occurs, whether it be in childhood or maybe in adulthood, that lead us to have a disordered relationship with food. So trauma is almost always the reason for obesity. Now, we can't necessarily say this because the body positive movement doesn't allow us to say these things. The body positive movement, and we have an episode on why it's the worst thing that's ever happened to obese people, I think. The body positive movement would want you to think that there's nothing wrong with being overweight and that you should support it. And if you were to tell people who support the body positive movement, which essentially is just enabling bad behavior by enabling gluttony, that most obese people are obese because of trauma they went through at a young age, they'd say, bite your tongue. They get angry at that. But supporting the body positive movement doesn't lead to any growth. It's just going to lead growth of your girth, but it's not going to lead to resolution. And I always think it's funny, like when you see on People magazine, these kind of bigger women who are like, I love my full curves, I love my body, da 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 da. And then 4 years later, I think of Kirstie Alley back from the 80s. She loses a lot of weight. Then she comes back on People magazine and then she's like, I look great. Or Oprah, right? When she loves, I love myself. I was going through a dark time back then. See, we just can't be honest and say, obesity sucks. I don't want to be fat. I have trauma, severe trauma that occurred to me at a young age or later on in my life. Sometimes it's girls who are raped when they're teenagers, and so they eat to avoid men finding them attractive. You know, whatever it is. I would like just more honest assessments and just be like, yeah, I'm fat and I hate it. It's shortening my life expectancy and I want to lose the weight. So then when you do lose the weight, like these celebrities, they'd be like, yeah, I lost the weight because I knew that was a bad vice. That was not a good thing for my health and longevity. This is what I would love to hear. But the media can't support that typically. The media must support, if you feel something is good for you, it's good for you. And you could apply that to so many things that society in its cultural Marxist tentacles have supported. I feel I'm this type of person, so you must accept me as this type of person. Fill in the blank. There's tons of things you can fill in with that. And so with body positive, it's the same thing. I'm fat, you must support my choices to remain fat, and if you don't, you're fatophobic. Just like when Obama was president, and if you didn't like some of his policies because he was a pretty leftist president, it's not, oh, you don't like his policies because he's a leftist president, it's you're racist. That's why you don't like it, right? This is the cultural Marxist tools that they use. So going back to obesity and trauma, it's when you strip everything back and people are honest, that's what you'll find. And the thing is, like, some people don't know that of the trauma that happened to them because maybe it happened at a young age, or they have suppressed it and compartmentalized it so much that they don't know that's the reason why they have a disordered relationship with food or alcohol or drugs or porn or gambling or whatever it is. And so one of the goals of this channel is to give you tools on how I dealt with it. That's what Reflections of a Weight Loss Warrior, that playlist is about. It's how I came to terms with my disordered eating, because if you haven't watched those series, I had disordered eating after I lost my weight too. But I was just doing calorie in, calorie out for a decade at least. So I talk about my experience with the losing weight and keeping it off for 30 years. So if any of it helps you, that's great. But I would tell you my central thesis of this channel, and maybe there's confirmation bias because I had this, maybe. And it's not like I've researched obesity, and this channel is all about my personal reflections, is trauma. The central thesis is trauma. Because you go back to the 5-year-old stops eating, but we didn't, either as a child or as an adult, resulting in obesity. And let's strip away the cognitive dissonance. Oh, I got a metabolic issue, or the stuff you hear about. It's nonsense. Even if you have hypothyroidism as you get older, we have an episode how you have to restrict your calories the older you get. You have to adapt. You have to adapt. But ultimately, I see my mom lives in an independent living community, and there's women there that she's 82. There's women in their 80s and 90s, and no doubt their metabolism's lower, but they're skinny as birds, because you have to be skinny as birds to get there. There's that old say, why don't you see a lot of fat 80-year-olds? Because they're dead. Because they're dead. So let's strip away the BS. I'm fat because of some glandular problem. We used to say that. No. We're fat because we have a disordered relationship with food that was typically caused by trauma. Let's strip away the BS. Let's be honest with ourselves, because that's where growth happens, is when we're honest with ourselves. Then we can start the progression, whether through therapy or journaling or going to OA, whatever it is for you. Then you can start the true healing and go from a victim to a survivor to a thriver. Then you can start with effective weight loss and weight maintenance. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Share with others. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.